if I had done any of the things that Donald Trump did, I would have been criticized not just by the Republicans, but by my own party.
Mijn familie arriveerde hier lang geleden in een land dat geloofde in zichzelf. Anderhalve eeuw later loop ik door een gebarricadeerde hoofdstad. Niet vanwege een orkaan, maar uit angst voor onlusten na de verkiezingen. Oh, dear son, won't you please? Een gespleten land dat zowel Barack Obama als Donald Trump voortbracht. Terwijl Trump zich nog altijd in het Witte Huis verschanst, publiceerde Obama het eerste deel van zijn politieke memoires. We praten over wat de Amerikanen nog verbindt en over zijn schrijverschap.
Tommy, nice to meet you.
Good afternoon.
How are you? Thank you for being here.
President.
Yeah, I think we'll...
Nice to meet you, yeah. We can
There you go.
Yeah.
So nice to see you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
What is the importance of writing to you? I mean, what intrinsic joy do you get from it?
Well, I have a friend, and she describes it exactly how I feel, which is I don't enjoy the writing process. I enjoy having written. I feel very good once I'm done.
Yeah.
In the middle of it, it's often torture. I would say that maybe 1 out of every 10 times that I sat down, you know, as a writer, you know those moments where you're writing and you feel the flow, and it just comes. And it's a wonderful feeling.
Not that often.
But it doesn't happen that often.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens sometimes, and you feel great, and at the end of it, you read it and you say, that's a nice paragraph, that's a nice sentence, that's a beautiful description.
Already as a young man, you had ambitions to be an author. Did the world lose an author when it gained a politician?
Well, I might be a better writer, but I might have not been read as much if I hadn't gone into politics. What is true, there's a certain writer's sensibility that I maintained,
Yeah.
even throughout my political career. I actually think it was helpful to me because, you know, what I value most, both as a reader and as a writer, is the ability to see the world through somebody else's eyes.
Yes.
And stand in their shoes. The imaginative act of
You
getting out.
You do that all the time in your book.
Yeah.
You reflect on what people think, what their ideas might be.
And I think that imaginative act of getting outside of yourself is at the heart of my politics.
Yeah.
Partly because of my own upbringing and being of mixed race, having lived in many different cultures when I was growing up, trying to make sense of how do you pull all those different strands of my life together.
As an author, my experience is that you always have to deal with shame because you have to put everything on the table and have to show yourself in a vulnerable position. How did you deal with shame in your memoir?
Well, that's interesting. I suppose it's harder to be vulnerable when you are in office because by definition there are people who, if they see a vulnerability, will go at it.
Yeah.
I felt more liberated, I think, writing after leaving office. Mm-hmm. And I tried not to be shy about my failings, my fears, my doubts. And so I'm less, I think, constrained in this book about just saying, you know, here's what I hoped happened, I made this mistake, that didn't work.
Barack Obama wordt in 2004 bekend met deze oproep tot eenheid.
There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
Obama verbindt zijn eigen levensverhaal als zoon van een Amerikaanse moeder en een Afrikaanse vader met dat van Amerika.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
4 jaar later wordt hij de eerste zwarte president. Dat roept ook weerstand op.
It's your country. Take it back.
But it also had to do with you.
Well, because I symbolized for many what they had feared, right? Which is suddenly the other is in the Oval Office.
Otherness, yes.
You know, a guy named Barack Hussein Obama,
Yeah.
whose father was a foreigner, an immigrant, you know, whose name has Muslim roots. And look, I wrestle in the book with how much of this is just race and how much of this is the broader reaction to globalization, to blue-collar work being de-emphasized, people feeling as if they're losing not just economic status, but also cultural status. And many of the people who gravitated towards Sarah Palin or to the Tea Party or Donald Trump have legitimate grievances. In many communities, their communities have been neglected. Globalization hasn't necessarily worked for them. And the challenge, I think, is how do we respond to their very real grievances, but steal them away, pull them away from politicians and leaders who seek to channel that anger and direct it towards others, and to try to scapegoat people. And that is a challenge that we're going to, I think, have for many years to come.
In what sense do you see the Trump presidency as a rebuttal to your own presidency? I mean, the reason that Donald Trump won in 2016 was because many working class people were disappointed by your administration and you personally. What could you have done differently, and maybe more specific, what do you regret personally?
It was interesting. After the election in 2016, we did some surveys and focus groups with people who had voted for me twice and then voted for Donald Trump. And that doesn't seem as if that's possible.
It doesn't seem rational.
But what we came to realize was that although they liked me, they trusted me, they thought I was on their side, they also felt as if Washington still didn't work, and they were willing to try something new. But there's also a certain portion of people who voted for Donald Trump who really just want to see change.
No matter in what direction?
No matter what direction. They just want to upend the apple cart because they feel as if the system is rigged against them. And I represented change, Donald Trump represented change.
Mr. President, how are you?
Na 8 jaar Obama kiezen de Amerikanen in 2016 voor de verandering van Donald Trump.
When you report fake news, when you report fake news, which CNN does a lot, you are the enemy of the people. Go ahead.
One of the questions that I raise in the book is, how do we maintain our commitment to freedom of expression, freedom of speech, that core liberal tradition, and yet still maintain a common narrative about who we are, and still maintain a baseline of common facts and truths. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing right now, the election's over. The fact is that Donald Trump has lost the election. He continues to defy the facts and simply assert a different reality, and there are millions of people and an entire media infrastructure to support that. Now, at the end of the day, the facts are so overwhelming that he will end up leaving office. But that hints at how powerful these alternative narratives can be, and we're going to have to find ways to rebuild both a common narrative and a fidelity to truth. And look, we can have debates about climate change and what's the best way to deal with it, but we can't dispute that the temperature is rising on the planet. Yep. And if you have one side, if you have one political party, if you've got half the country that believes it's a hoax and simply says that evidence is not true, then it's very difficult for a democracy to function effectively.
Kamala Harris warned that democracy is never guaranteed. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine the United States without democracy?
No. That doesn't mean the unimaginable couldn't happen. Too much of human history is filled with societies that appeared to be functioning well and suddenly veer off into catastrophe. Europe is filled with examples of very sophisticated cultures that descend into barbarity. So I don't think you can ever be complacent. I also have to remind people, though, this is not the first time where our democracy has teetered a little bit. I mean, Richard Nixon engaged in behavior that was as bad as anything Donald Trump did.
But at that time, people still believed the press.
But exactly, the press had authority, and at that time there were Republicans who, when the evidence finally came out, said, okay, this is wrong. And what distinguished this time was the degree to which you saw silence almost uniformly, with very few exceptions, from elected Republican officials. And I think that's dangerous. Look, the Democratic Party is not perfect. If you look at American history, for most of American history, it was Democrats who, in the South, who were the most oppressive towards African Americans. The president I admire the most, Abraham Lincoln, helped found the Republican Party and was the first Republican president. So these things go back and forth. But what I will say is today, the Democratic Party, for whatever flaws, weaknesses, we still believe in facts. If I had done any of the things that Donald Trump did, I would have been criticized not just by the Republicans, but by my own party. My own party would not have allowed me to ignore the science around a pandemic. My own party would not have allowed me to try to get our Justice Department to investigate my political opponents just because I wanted them to. There are certain things that I would have been held to account.
De president die 12 jaar geleden verandering beloofde,
Change has come to America.
moet nu erkennen dat ook hij meer polarisatie niet heeft kunnen voorkomen.
What do you think? Which presidency is more likely to be the anomaly? Yours or that of Donald Trump?
That's a good question. As I write in the preface of the book, the jury's still out. I am optimistic, but...
By nature?
By nature, by temperament. But I've read enough history to know that history does not move in a straight line. And obviously, I have no way of judging. If you had to choose a time in world history where you would want to be alive, and you didn't know ahead of time who you were going to be, a king, a peasant, a man or a woman, you'd choose now. Even in the midst of a pandemic, right? Which hopefully we'll be able to deal with.
And why would you choose now?
And the reason is because if you just survey history, the world's never been less violent. The world's never been more tolerant. The world has never been healthier or better educated. It's better than it was in the 1300s. It's better than it was in the 1500s. And that tells me that there is something in us that knows the difference between good and bad. The question is, can we organize our societies so that part of us, that spirit in us, is operational. It manifests itself. It's real. And it's hard because humans are complicated and human societies are complicated. And our brains right now are having difficulty processing the amount of information that's coming in. Our brains are having to catch up with technology and globalization and integration. And it's confusing and it's frightening.
So we need a swift evolution.
We do. And I suspect what will happen is that there will be some crises that cause us to suffer. And climate change is probably the one thing that I'm most worried about, because that may be irreversible if we don't catch up to it fast enough. But I believe that if we are able to at least avert that particular disaster, that over time we will we'll get better and not worse. But that it's almost a leap of faith on my part. I can't prove that. I choose to believe that, and I act as if that might be true.
Mr. President, thank you so much for this conversation.
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.